David Frangione, Modern Drummer. Here we are for another Modern Drummer podcast, this time live from Hard Rock in Hollywood, Florida, and a dear friend of mine, a legendary figure in the music business, and a lifelong drummer and now manager, Paul Geary. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, thanks so much, David.
It's great to see you here. So let's start at the beginning, because now your career is full-on music business management, of course, managing Godsmack and Joe Perry and Hollywood Vampires and others. And the origin, though, is from the drums, of all things.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it all started there. I was probably 13 years old, and my mom managed to get me a small drum kit. And I was nuts about music at the time. I was living in Boston, so Aerosmith was a young, successful band at that time, and really had me enthralled in the whole thing. You know?
And so at 13, that's when it starts. She gets you. Now, why did she buy you a drum kit? How did that even come up?
Well, at the church my family used to go to, they'd have on the weekends they'd have these dances, and they'd have bands playing, and I was amazed when I went down one afternoon. It was right up the street from my house, and they were setting up. The band was setting up, and I was watching the drummer at their sound check playing, and I was just amazed by it. And I went and talked to him, and he actually put the sticks in my hand and said, "Yeah, kind of taught me what it felt like and how my body should be positioned and all." And after that, I just went nuts, and I just begged my mom, and she bought me a used set of drums from somebody who, discarded them.
And you end up, of course, playing them, practicing. Who were some of your early influences that, really got the ball rolling?
Well, one of my friends had an older brother, and the older brother was already tuned into all those bands in the 70s. So it was Aerosmith, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, The Who, that it was all like what we know as classic rock now. But that back then, he'd let me take a few albums, and I'd play them on my dad's player, and then I'd bring them back, and he'd give me a couple more, and I'd sort of like a library of records
that you're playing to. You're
yeah,
putting
well,
headphones
I was
on
trying. Yeah, I mean, at first, it was beyond my playing skills. It was just being absolutely enamored with Aerosmith, Get Your Wings, and Led Zeppelin 2. Oh my God, Yes, and Pink Floyd, and all those records that and even like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, with Carl Palmer playing like that. I couldn't have dreamed playing like that, but listening to it incessantly over and over again, and then eventually it became like with the Stones, I could put the headphones on and play Honky Tonk Woman, because it was just a simple pattern, and learning how to keep a meter with, along by listening and playing back to that. And that's really where it all started.
Wow, awesome. And were you a big Bonham fan, listening to Led Zeppelin 2? And
Oh, yeah, Bonham. My favorite guys at that time were Bonham, Joey Kramer, and then Neil Peart came along with Rush, and that was completely other, almost discouraging experience.
It's like the first time we see Buddy Rich.
Yeah,
right?
Same thing, yeah. But Butter, it's just so damn good that you think, oh my God, should I even be trying?
And then how does that, if we fast forward, because I'm sure there were a lot of gigs, a lot of playing, et cetera, as you're pursuing this instrument, how do you end up in the dream, which of course turns into extreme? How does that happen?
Well, it was garage bands back then. We were just in the garage with other kids in the neighborhood that could play, and playing covers of all those bands that we loved, or trying to play them anyway. And one day in 1979, I was in the garage with a couple of other guys playing, and a knock came on the door, and it was Gary Sharon. And he lived not too far away, had heard the music playing in the garage, and decided to introduce himself. So he came up, and I opened the door of the garage, and he said, so I could hear you playing. It's all the songs that I really love, and I want to be a singer. He hadn't really been in a band, but he came in, and we thought, oh, okay, because we didn't have a singer. We were just taking turns ourselves, doing it just to keep pace with the songs. And he came in and sang, and from that day on, he and I stayed through every incarnation of our bands until it was eventually Extreme.
Wow. Wow. So a lifelong collaborator, really, as it turns out,
Well,
from
yeah,
that knock.
that's right. We had a band called Adrenaline in 1979, and in '81 we became The Dream, and we sold that name to CBS and became Extreme, and that's how Extreme happened.
And Extreme goes through all of these years of evolution, from clubs to getting a record deal with A&M, and then, step by step by step. And then when we fast forward to what we'll call the height of Extreme's, moment, looking at, top 40 and how it really evolved. You're playing arenas, you're playing huge places. You have More Than Words, which is still to this day a song that's considered one of the greatest songs. What was the biggest thing that you learned from being in a band at that level that you could then, I think you probably took some of that wisdom and applied it to when you went to the other side of the glass, as we call it, when you became a manager for bands as big or bigger than Extreme, right? But you have to have that paradigm to know what that is, right? You have to be a captain. If you're going to captain a 300-foot ship, you got to captain a 300-foot ship, and it's not like you can take a 20-foot ship and then all of a sudden successfully navigate 300 feet. So here you are now at that level, and transitioning to management from there, from that height. What's the big lesson?
Well, it's interesting. It's like anything else. Like when you're young and playing, arenas and stadiums is almost abstract. You can't even imagine getting to that. A big step was the first time actually seeing an arena concert, which was like probably around 1978. I was 17 years old, and Aerosmith played at the Boston Garden, and I was out sitting in the audience looking up there, and it was a whole new experience of energy, and like, oh my God, how does this happen? Who are these people? And as a sidebar to the answer to your question, it was the first band I ever saw live, and I just stared and was so intently interested in this that who would have ever known, this is a little off topic, but that Aerosmith would be the first band I ever saw in an arena. And 10 years later, the first band we ever opened for in an arena was Aerosmith. And it was like a religious experience because I'm on stage playing for 13,000 people, and I'm literally saying, I'm here, because I thought maybe it would never happen again. I thought maybe this is a one-off.
Now somebody's in the audience being you 10 years earlier.
I was looking out to where I had been sitting, over 10 years ago, and thinking, this is incredible. It's like being sucked up into the eye of the dream, and then looking, and I was crying. I'm going, I'm here. While I was playing, I was crying because, like I said, I thought maybe I'd never be there again, and I was reminding myself on the way to the arena not to miss it, being so worried about getting my parts right that it would be blown by and I wouldn't have sort of absorbed.
You wanted to be in the moment.
Yes.
And take in every bit of that memory.
That's right. And what you were saying about that transition is that, in between all those years were backyard parties, up to small, bars, and just moving our way up to bigger bars. And then eventually, we got a break. In 1984, we had our shit together, at least at that point, where we were playing out regularly and we were honing our skills as writers. And at the Orpheum Theater in Boston, headlining was Night Ranger, who had just had a giant hit with Sister Christian.
Oh, sure. Yeah, huge.
And their opening act fell out. And the promoter, John Law, offered us the gig. So we opened for them at the Orpheum in Boston. That was my first experience with an actually seated audience.
Because everything else was clubs and barbecues.
Yeah, and it was really incredible because, just taking this step from clubs into proper concert was a whirlwind in that. And you know, as you were saying earlier, it's not like you go from a 300-seat club and then suddenly you're playing an arena. It's all these baby steps all along the way, and you don't notice it as it's happening. But eventually you've been groomed so much that you can pretty much do this just like anything else in your life. You brush your teeth. I can get up there and I can play these parts, and you know, the writing improves because you write a couple of hundred songs before you have a few greats.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and ultimately the changing part was that I realized while playing arenas and stadiums in the early 90s, that I had learned so much about the business, and now it was no longer abstract. Now I understood it completely, and I knew what it was and knew what it wasn't. And I realized I could take that whole journey with another act by sharing the wisdom and guiding them back through what I already done. Because if I already done it once, it's possible.
Right.
And
From scratch.
that's right.
But now it's not from scratch in the sense that although the act will be, the process won't, because you are now
Correct.
the person. When the old saying, if you want to know the road ahead, ask those who are coming back. Now you're the person coming back.
It's exactly what happened. And Sully back then was hanging at my house, sleeping on my couch, playing video games at night, and he was bringing me demo tapes of his early music. And at that point, I had decided I was going to stop touring, and I left Extreme in '94. I explained to them that I wanted to now use the experience that I've had to help other groups get ahead. And Sully was almost like an experiment back then, because you know, he was toying with what would become Godsmack.
It wasn't even Godsmack yet. He
Not
was
yet.
writing songs and
he
putting
was
the repertoire
he was
together.
playing drums for various bands and bringing me recordings, and then he began to put together what would be Godsmack. And funny enough, it's the first thing that I really committed to fully as a manager. And I owned a theater in Providence called the Strand Theater, and I was having national acts play, and I would slip Godsmack in whenever I could on these bills. And it gave Sully some better experience of playing, and it was like 2,800 capacity theater.
That's big for a small.
That was sort of his version of being at the Orpheum for the first time.
Yeah,
And
great
all that.
experience.
Yeah.
And he's honing his skills, whether he realizes it or not, for large
Yeah,
audiences.
that's right.
Because that's
I was honing
good-sized
my
audience.
skills as a manager, and you know, after about close to a year working together and building it up on a regional level, we made a deal with Republic Universal, which at the time was a young company. Now they're, you know, the hottest in the business.
Oh, yeah.
It was a young company, but you know, the first record really exploded, and I learned so much more even through the process of working on the end of publishing and records and so forth, that you know, I now was able to repeat the process with Godsmack.
And Shannon Larkin is Godsmack's drummer, is on the August 2023 Modern Drummer cover. Paul Geary is going to be in an upcoming feature that you'll see for your iconic drum sets that we're going to talk about and what I call a career in music. Hi, everyone. It's David Frangione, and we are so excited to bring this incredible content to you, to the drumming community. But the fact is, such a great percentage of you are not subscribed to the Modern Drummer YouTube channel. So please hit the subscribe button below. Hit that, be a subscriber on our YouTube channel so we can continue to bring these innovators, these incredible drummers to you all the time. We're so proud and excited. And pick up Shannon's issue of Modern Drummer, August 2023. This is an awesome issue. I can't wait for you to check it out. It's available in our shop, moderndrummer.com, or hit the link in the description. And all of these issues, they're here for you. They're waiting for you. We're so excited to bring them to you. The drumming community, Modern Drummer, over 45 years. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks for supporting the drumming community.
Hey, this is Vinny Colaiuta
and Kimo Williams. Please check out our Red Summer 1919 is streaming now.
It's a must listen.
Also with Mike Stern, Richard Bona, and Michael Brecker. Find out more at jkimowilliams.com.
And we fast forward to today, Paul, and Godsmack is on tour doing huge business, inspiring as many people as they ever have on a massive scale. And what do you think, in a nutshell, what's the formula for that? Like, how does a band last? Because you're the captain of the ship, and you got over 20 years that this band has continued to grow, continue to, if not keep their audience, grow it on a very large scale. And it's harder to do than ever, especially in the rock lane. So here we are today, and you're doing it. What would be advice or feedback you'd give on that subject?
Well, I learned something over the years, and it just took time and reading books. But the funny part is, when you learn more about demographics, you begin to understand how the consumer will behave. Earlier I gave an example as I read this book called Wealth Shift, and it was about how demographics affected products. And in that, in the 60s, they had, for instance, one example was in the 60s, they had Volkswagen, and that was all the rage. They were inexpensive. They had those vans and the bugs, and young people in their late teens and early 20s could afford them, and they were reliable. And what happened was, when the 70s came along, suddenly those cars kind of fell away, and all the two-door sports cars came along, like the Mustang and the Camaro, and the Corvette was hot as could be in the 70s. And you got Volkswagen trying to redesign the cars, figure out what they're doing wrong. And then throughout the 70s, suddenly you notice coming into the 80s that minivans were a new sort of explosive product, and all these cars were falling aside, like the Camaro and the Corvette. And, the Corvette redesigned like crazy in the early 80s. It went from, the 70s style to the 80s, and they actually survived it. But the others didn't. Camaro discontinued, Mustang discontinued, Dodge. It turns out that they could have redesigned all day long any one of those. What it became was the baby boomer demographic in the 60s. They needed cheap, inexpensive cars. They didn't have money, but they needed transportation. Once they got a little bit older, into their, say, mid-20s, now they had jobs. They were able to afford to buy these two-door sports cars, the Mustangs and all that. So no matter what Volkswagen did, it wasn't mattering, because it wasn't functional to that huge audience that had been buying them. Didn't mean they didn't like Volkswagen anymore. It meant they could now afford these cars, and that's what they were buying. And eventually the car companies figured this out, like when in the 90s, the minivans were pretty much, sidebarred by SUVs, and eventually, as you can follow along, as these people got older, they started get married and having kids. The wife's like out with the Corvette, we need a minivan or an SUV, which became the rage. But the point is, you could literally watch as this demographic grew, and to equate it to music, what happened was, many bands in the 80s, for instance, were scratching their heads in the 90s when they felt like they were making just as good records as they made before, but they weren't selling well. And what happened was, just like with cars, the audience was growing up, having kids. They were no longer actively buying records. They were not actively going out to concerts, because they had a life now with kids and a job and to keep up. And so what I learned through this process was that a band like Godsmack, where, we were selling several million copies of each record that came out in the late 80s and the early millennium, and early 90s. And at that point, you could see that, we were dropping off. Now, records in general were dropping off, but, we were dropping off on not only sales, but eventually even the concerts became a little less explosive. We were like at one point regularly selling 10 to 12,000 tickets. Now it became 8,000, 9,000, like that. And you kind of, one feels at that point in it that, wow, we're losing steam somehow.
Right.
But it took me learning about demographics in the book to know that all we have to do is wait this out and don't make any mistakes and just continue to do the best we can
Stay
in the
authentic.
market. Yeah. And eventually what would happen, just like in cars, what happened in cars was there was suddenly a big resurgence of Camaros and Mustangs and Corvettes. They came back. They put them back on the market. There was a nostalgic resurgence. And just like, so the thought with Godsmack, and it actually just came to fruition over the last 2 years, was that, okay, now the Godsmack fan of 1999 is 20 years older. His kids, their kids, are graduating, they're out of the house. Now the parents have more disposable income and they're revisiting and they're going to come back in droves because, they want to relive what they considered to be their music of at the time. And so I realized what we needed to do is create tours of era, like era tours. So there's a band, Stained. The band Stained was, had their biggest hits during that period in the late 90s and early millennium. And so we just did a Godsmack Stained tour that proved the whole point. And it was the biggest business the band had ever experienced live. And the merchandise is, close to doubled in the per heads each night. Wow. And it just proved the point that what happened here was in a matter of time, all those people came full circle. And now what you got to do is give them an event that
is what they want.
Yeah,
really. It's meeting their needs. Where are they in their lives now that this is going to be compelling enough to get them to basically go to a venue,
go out, buy a ticket,
right.
Get out of the house and go.
Right.
And you can see it in the audience too. Every night I walk the audience when I'm there with the band, and I see everyone's 40s and 50s, where 20 years ago they were 20s and
right.
maybe 30s.
Right.
Right. And this is exactly, I'm absolutely sure that this is what happened. And it's now teaching me where the direction of the band should go from here, where it's not even important if a record comes out, because the main body of audience that are coming are people who grew up on the band and then their offspring, who are being turned on. We can see all the time that parents are bringing their teenagers to the show.
The kids are discovering it through the parents.
That's right.
Some call it, a rite of passage, right? As the kids are now being
That's
handed the parents' music to explore and be inspired the way the parents were. And you're actually seeing that play out every night in real life.
That's right. And that's probably the biggest lesson as a manager. Now, over those years, of course, after Godsmack exploded, I signed a band called Fuel out of Pennsylvania and had a few big hits with them. And that led to moving to LA and expanding my business. I ended up signing the Smashing Pumpkins, Creed for Rebirth. I managed the Scorpions in North America. So many acts that along the way to learn from, and each one being in their own cycle of
career. Where are they in the band's evolution? And to go full circle, you managed Joe Perry from Aerosmith. That first concert at Boston Garden, he's standing on the stage playing guitar, stage left, and here you are managing him now, and one of his projects, Hollywood Vampires, big, successful
that's a trip.
band with Alice Cooper and Johnny Depp, and that band's doing great.
It's actually almost unbelievable that my first record being Aerosmith, Get Your Wings, and learning from that, and then the first concert years later being Aerosmith at the Boston Garden, and then 10 years after that, first band opening on an arena level was Aerosmith during the Permanent Vacation tour, and then some years later Joe we've stayed in loose touch, and Joe hired me to be his manager, and that led to he introduced me to Johnny Depp because they were playing together, and I became friendly with Johnny, and that led to managing the Hollywood Vampires. With Alice Cooper's manager, Shep Gordon, who's a legendary manager, and I'm still learning a lot from him.
Yeah.
It's been an amazing
Super
ride.
mensch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible. Well, it certainly has been an amazing ride, and it's been amazing having you here today.
Oh,
thank you for stopping
for
by.
having
Thank
me.
you for being a part of Modern Drummer and for all these years of inspiration. So, Paul Geary, Godsmack's manager, among many others, drummer from Extreme, and a lifelong friend of mine. We're both from Boston. We've known each other pretty much our whole lives, and it's great to have you here today.
And
Paul.
I went to beg David here. My guy Shannon hasn't been on the cover. Come on.
Yeah. Well,
And he's like, he deserves to be on the cover.
He does.
He's earned it.
No, he has. It's true. And you can imagine how many requests we get to be on the covers. And there's a lot of great drummers that want to be on the cover. And it's a very, very, comprehensive process to determine, like, who is going to be on the cover and when and kind of where are they at this moment. And Shannon is well deserving of it. And the history that he has with Godsmack, where the band's at right now, as you said, at the peak of their career, inspiring more people than ever.
25 years in.
Yeah, 25 years in and still playing sold out, arenas and large scale shows. And it's very well deserved. And stay tuned because Shannon is our featured guest on the Modern Drummer podcast this week. And we can't wait for you to get to know him better. And it's the perfect adjunct to his cover story and the rundown that we just filmed. So you're absolutely right. Thank you for bringing Shannon to us at this moment, bringing him to the forefront. And stay tuned. Shannon Larkin's next.